So I want to welcome you on behalf of the Center for the Study of Social and Political Movements, myself and Dr. Alex Hensby. We're really pleased to put on this panel about sustainable shopping in Canterbury. One of the hot points of discussion in the PG and undergraduate programming on environmental politics here at Kent is this concept of sustainability. What is it? Who defines it? Who does it serve? Who gets left out on that? You know, the politics of the definition. How that might be aligned or misaligned with consumption norms and consumption goals. And then also we want to be talking about what's really going on in the real world in our Canterbury community. So I have brought on board an excellent collection of experts. I have one of my undergraduate students, Fleur Jouet, who will be speaking on behalf of our environmental politics class. I see some other students are also surfacing in the audience. We also have Georgina Traylor, who is a postgraduate student who's studying under Alex Hensby, who's co-direct the center with me. Then we also have Joe Kidd. Joe Kidd is the who's who of sustainable sort of mobilization, I guess, in the Canterbury area, but also in Kent more broadly. I'm going to have you all introduce yourselves as you like, if you want to add more onto that. Maybe, Joe, we could start with you because it's really hard to summarize all the things that you do.
Thanks, Corey. Good to see everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, various things really. I start these days by saying I'm a farmer, which is a little bit controversial, but not that kind of farmer. So I'm a veganic farmer, and we focus on agroforestry, and we're a small farm just outside Canterbury near Faversham. And I also run Kent Vegan Events. So we were organising an annual festival. We haven't done one for obvious reasons for a couple of years, but we now run a monthly market in the High Street in Canterbury in St Peter's Church. And I also run the Abbots Mill project, which is an environmental and social justice project really in the centre of Canterbury near where the Abbots Mill would have been, just outside the Miller's Arms pub. So we have that project as well, and various, I'm on the eco diocese with the Canterbury diocese and that kind of thing. So I get involved in lots of different things and annoy people.
Thanks, Joe. Fleur, would you like to introduce yourself really quick?
Of course, so I'm an undergraduate politics student. So I'm from France. I study in France and also in Cannes for these 4 years, and I want to be an environmental law judge back in France when I'm done with my studies. Sort of work it within the system.
Yes. That's another point of debate we've been talking about in environmental politics class. Very cool. Thank you. Georgina, what about you?
Hello, I'm a PhD student at the University of Kent. I'm doing it in environmental social science, and my project is to do with Extinction Rebellion and how XR framed the environmental crisis in its sort of very early nascent stage. I'm also an elected member, a councillor on Folkestone and Hythe District Council with the Green Party. So I've got some sort of views and insight on notions of sustainability at the local government level and politically as well. And yeah, I mean, I that's just an intro. Do you want us to launch into our ideas on sustainability just yet, Corey, or should we hold off?
Let's hold just a second because I want to introduce Alex, who's going to be moderating the Q&A. If you want to give a shout out, Alex, real quick.
Yeah. So I'm Alex Hensby, lecturer in sociology and co-director of the Centre for the Study of Social Political Movements with Corey. I'm interested in sustainability. In addition, as an ethical concern, I'm interested in it as a form of political participation, in the extent to which it can represent a sort of individual and a collective form of consumer activism, and some of the kind of the way in which we make kind of ethical decisions based on situations often sort of beyond our circumstance. So that's a particular kind of point of interest for me.
Excellent, thank you. So that does it for introductions, I guess, except for myself. Like Alex, I'm a director of the Social Movement Center at the University of Kent. I teach environmental politics and animal rights at the undergraduate level. And with Alex, I also do social movement stuff at the postgrad level. And before we get started with the panel, I do recognize that there's a good mix of folks in our audience. And just to remind you, this is being recorded. So if you don't want your face or your messages to be recorded, make sure you manage that accordingly. Alex is going to be handling any of the Q&A that arises from the audience. My job is I'm simply going to help to moderate, make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. And also, before we get going, I want to thank you very much for participating. If you're a student and these topics are interesting to you, definitely check out the courses that we have on offer here at Kent. If you're a community member, I'm really, really excited to see you here, and thank you for joining us. And hopefully we can start to build up a relationship, and we can work with each other in future programming. That's really an aim for us at the Social Movement Center, is to be much more community engaged. So let's get started. I'm actually going to start with Fleur, if you're not too, no pressure. I'm going to start with you as one of my undergraduate students. We talked about this quite a bit in our environmental politics course. What is sustainability? If you could define it or how you understand it, maybe we could get the conversation started on what exactly sustainability is. And then I know that Georgina is kind of raring to go on that as well. But Fleur, if you want to get started.
Yeah, of course. So I guess I define sustainability as a sort of political compromise within the system we live in to sort of manage both building economic growth and development, and also try to preserve future environmental environmental curb the damage we're doing to the environment, to make sure that future generations can be in a thriving environment, I guess. I don't necessarily agree with sustainability. Like, it's been put forward quite a bit these past few years, and I mean, I kind of believe that it's just a way to sort of keep like this going for a few more years before it explodes, and like keep curb the damage, but not quite enough, and prevent like a more radical revolution from taking place.
I think that's an excellent jumping off point. You're absolutely getting at the heart of the debate there. It's the compromise that is needed, but are we really getting that radical change that's necessary? Georgina, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I think I'm very much aligned with what Fleur was touching on there. So say in local government, and say in the planning framework in this country, planning law, it's based on the notion of sustainable development being sort of a three-pronged approach: economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental. But the way we see that playing out on the ground is that by and large, what they deem economic sustainability is what wins out absolutely every time. But economic sustainability actually means unending economic growth. And we know that unending economic growth is it cannot exist within a finite planet. There aren't infinite resources. So that, for me, is the very heart of why this notion of sustainability is really problematic. And even like broader speaking, when you talk about the looking at the UN sustainable development goals, you've got a spectrum of all these sort of things that fall under it, including economic sustainability, which means growth. But the key one in those sustainability goals, sustainable development goals, is climate change. If we don't address climate, that entire system sort of breaks down, and none of those things can be truly sustainable. So what I would say, as far as through a sort of a consumer lens, no consumption is sustainable unless the economic system within which you're operating is circular. It's a circular economy. It's a regenerative economy. and so we're not going to shop our way out of the environmental crisis. So whilst those small consumer choices are important, but they do actually have to be radical, because you have to understand where every single item that you are consuming, what's the supply chain, what's the energy that's gone into creating that. Even sustainable items like a water bottle, like what are the resources that have gone into that? So I think considering those things in your decision making. But I'm of the view that we're better off trying to dismantle this problematic system first, and only then, once we've done that, can we truly shop sustainably. So that's me.
Thanks, Regina. Joe, what do you think?
Absolutely, I agree with both what Fleur and Georgina have already said, but I think, you know, sustainability within a capitalist system is an oxymoron, and sustainability itself, sustainability has just become an overused word, which means it now is kind of meaningless, and it's used by corporates to really greenwash and, you know, trick people into buying stuff that they don't need. So I prefer to really, I think, you know, I don't know how long ago, but the kind of UN regional definition, if you like, of sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability was around one planet living. So living as if we actually only have one planet rather than 3 or 5 or, you know, however many we're, you know, the way we're consuming at the moment. But I think we're beyond that. We need to think about restorative, not even regenerative. I used to like the word regenerative, but they're kind of in terms of veganic farming, the grass fed grazing lobby have kind of stolen that word. So it's all about, you know, regenerative, but it's not really. So I prefer kind of words like restorative, you know, putting back more, not in a kind of human managing, we're kind of superior to nature, but we are part of nature, and we need to recognize that. So whatever we do shouldn't be damaging the planet, and it shouldn't be hurting anyone. And when, you know, I say anyone, that's all people, human people and more than human people. So
Joe, it would be really awesome if you could explain some of the stuff that you're doing on your farm, especially for folks who maybe are not familiar with sustainability politics, because you touched on a lot of issues where with greenwashing and with big ag kind of taking over the popularity of sustainable imagery and symbolism. So maybe if you could talk about a little bit more detail about that kind of appropriation, and then the sort of things that you're doing that are more aligned with, you know, one planet living.
Or less than one planet living, hopefully, if you know what I mean. Well, we're a veganic farm, so that basically means that if you think about organic farming generally on a large scale still uses certain chemicals are allowed, and it also mainly will use animal fertilizer, so manure, which mainly comes from factory farms and slaughterhouses. So that's where that waste product goes, you know. So veganic farming is beyond that. We don't use any animal products. Obviously, we don't use any animals. We don't exploit animals. Plenty of animals are involved in the system, in the natural system, but they're self-determined. So, you know, and we're not controlling them. And we use, the way we're doing it is agroforestry. So we're growing different crops, but with trees as well. So you have a mixture. You have a food forest or alley cropping. So you have rows of trees and different crops between. And we're a lot of veganic well, there aren't a huge amount of veganic farmers, but it is growing. But most veganic farmers at the moment will use a kind of rotational approach. So they'll grow annual crops and then they'll rotate that maybe, you know, and so they'll kind of till the soil and turn the soil over. And our approach is basically to use to grow perennials, so crops that don't need to be replanted. So you're not constantly tilling the soil and ploughing the soil. And the kind of organic matter gets returned to the soil when you harvest. So you're building soil. It's all about soil. I could go on about soil forever, but I won't. So it's that you're kind of, you know, you're within a closed system, and you're working with nature, within nature, not trying to control nature, not saying, I mean, you know, obviously sometimes we have to pull a few things out around trees, the bottom of trees when there's bindweed and things. But really, we try and avoid as much as possible. It's kind of a hands-off approach, and like as I say, it's a growing movement. So yeah, I mean, it's not the whole point of kind of mainstream, if you like, conventional farming. Non-organic conventional farming it's very much dependent on big ag. It's dependent on chemicals. You cannot grow what farmers grow, you know, arable crops, particularly without chemicals like glyphosate and pesticides and things that are toxic to the environment, toxic to ourselves. And those, you know, those particular crops have to be grown with those chemicals, otherwise they won't grow because they're so kind of fragile. So this is about resilience and robust crops and looking around and what, you know, it's permaculture principles really, what grows happily where you are and how you can kind of maximize that and, you know, focus on diversity. I don't know if that kind of, does that kind of answer what you?
Yeah, that's a big chunk of it. So that leads me to question then, you said it's a small movement, it's a growing movement, and we're just talking in this case about food, but of course sustainability, I think food is one of the big ones, but sustainability also pertains to a lot of different consumption patterns. We all have to consume, right? And then the options for supporting those smaller efforts may not always be around. So I guess the next question then is, for large scale sustainable living then, can we align our consumption patterns with these more sustainable alternatives? I guess if Flair, if you're comfortable, I'll come back to you because you were talking about that radical structural change that we need. Do you have any thoughts on how we might align our consumption patterns with being truly sustainable? Because Joe was just discussing the limitations that, you know, these efforts are facing. Not much of the time it's very small scale. What do you think?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question? I'm not entirely sure.
Well, I mean, I was just tossing. There's no real question. It's just, if you have any thoughts on how do we align our consumption with the sustainability? We have to consume. And maybe we don't have many of Joe's farms around for us to go from. And you were mentioning earlier, we need some major radical structural change. So if you have any thoughts, or if you want me to bounce over to Georgina, we've got to consume. How can we consume?
Yeah, the issue is that small scale initiatives are absolutely necessary, but they cannot be enough. We also need a lot to entirely revamp the capitalist system that we live in, because as long as we're in that system, as Joe was mentioning earlier, then no consumption can truly be sustainable. So I think we also need to rethink the way the government actually works, the way the different states interact with each other, maybe even the size of the states, the institutions, and also even like the goals that are like the social goals that we're taught and that we're pursuing are not at all aligned with sustainable consumption, because if the goals that we're taught is to have a big house, possibly even a second, and a car and another car, and if as long as the happiness model is aligned with endless consumption, then happiness and sustainable consumption can never truly match, because if happiness is endless consumption in this world, then it's never going to work.
Can I ask you, Fleur, because there's probably some folks in the audience who maybe have not thought about capitalism as being particularly problematic, especially for Western countries. We've been socialized to think that capitalism is the greatest economic system. And so you keep alluding to the fact that capitalism may not be aligned, and so is Joe. Can you explain for people who may not be aware, like, what is it about capitalism that is clashing with sustainable practices? What is that you keep hinting at?
Of course. So capitalism is aimed at always producing more, always doing more, and also it's rooted on an exploitative system. So whether it's within the factories system, where if you want to have more money than others, then obviously some people have less, and on a larger scale, it's the world economy functions with entire countries, entire populations that are being exploited, and no matter the level that you're looking at, there's people that benefit from it and people that are completely exploited. And whatever the time period you're looking at, and again, whatever the scale, then you have the exploiting countries or people or social class and the exploited. So that's as I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. So that as the system, yeah, it can't work because you have again a limited amount of resources. Joe was mentioning the one planet consumption, and that's like we can't keep making more and more and more if we have the same basis of resources. And we've been sort of sidestepping that problem through more exploitation and technological progress, but at some point, and that point is getting closer and closer, it's just not going to be enough anymore. And if we keep going that system of over-exploiting people and resources, then it can never truly align with a system that's meant to make everyone, and again, not just humans, but non-human animals as well. But if everyone is to be happy and for a long time, and so everyone is today's generations, but also tomorrow's, then you have to be in a system that will take more than it's giving back.
Yeah, thank you. You absolutely nailed it. So I guess I could summarize here. You're emphasizing it's a system based on exploitation. It's based on inequality. That is the capitalist system. It's not a system of fairness. It's about endless growth as well, which has also proved very problematic for the Earth's ecosystems. But then people will come back to that flower and say, well, we can make growth sustainable. We can make a green capitalism. So maybe, Georgina, if you want to jump in there and tackle that, I guess that counter to Flair's critique that, well, why can't we just make capitalism green and make economic growth based on sustainable growth?
Well, I don't know whether this gets to the heart of that question, but for me, the core issue is that consider that we're so immersed in this capitalist system that we're even framing this as an individual consumer choice, and I think that's even quite problematic, because then, as long as it's seen as that individual choice, it's going to exist in that competitive sort of market, which has got no sort of regulatory bounds on exploiting the planet. I think that the changes need to be so radical and structural that deciding sort of where you're going to shop, and I mean, like, absolutely, get the most local, environmentally friendly, reduced fruit and veg, but just to give you an idea of, well, say one, it wasn't a consumer choice, but it was a lifestyle choice I made recently. So my freezer broke, and I couldn't bring myself to buy a new one. So now we've been living for like 3 months now without a fridge freezer, and I don't eat meat or dairy, so the produce I'm eating is tins of stuff and fruit and veg that we just need to keep, make sure we're sort of eating it as we get it and not letting it go wrong. But we're saving more food. We're wasting less food because nothing gets stuck behind, at the back of the fridge or whatever. My energy bills, I've saved so much energy that the energy company now owe me money because they were sort of estimating too high. So, and I've been telling people about this, and they're just like, what? Can't even conceive of not having a fridge freezer. But like, why not? Like, I mean, depending how hot your flat is or whatever. But there's these things that are so like ingrained in us from birth that you must have white goods. And a dishwasher gave up the ghost as well, and we just haven't replaced that. And washing the dishes, at home is more fun. It's part of a routine that and you're not saving much labor anyway by having a dishwasher. So they're consumption choices, but that's the getting rid of items, not the making a greener choice somehow. And I'm very conscious of marketing and advertising. I've worked for many years as a commercial copywriter in all sorts of sectors, and how like the very essence of being human has been absolutely sort of exploited by this capitalist system. And as a copywriter, you're working from these like customer profiles to sort of eke out every last sort of emotion or meaningful aspect of what it is to be human, to sort of sell in stuff. And on the whole, a lot of the industries I was working for, weren't sustainable. I mean, some of them were absolutely awful. But even if I was to be trying to sort of sell in, genuinely kind of restorative sort of, products on the market, it doesn't align having that individual consumption frame in that sort of competitive market. So I think I agree with what was sort of said earlier. It's this sort of mass, it has to come from this sort of top-down way of working. And I mean, not just on the district council, I just see opportunity after opportunity missed to make these sort of changes on a local government level, but like the culture and the trajectory is so embedded and so like sort of unconscious that I just feel like we're still not getting anywhere. So I hope that touches on some points.
I think you ended on a perfect segue into Joe, because Joe has been putting together some community-based alternatives, but also you and Terry were running for local government, right?
We did, yeah. Terry more recently. Terry's my husband, yeah, partner. He ran this year. What year are we? I don't know. I'm losing years. And I ran quite a few years ago, yeah, for Kent and for Canterbury for Green Party. Needless to say, yeah. Never again. Well, not never again. Maybe when I'm a bit older. Just so much work. I think Georgina will tell you. Just you can't really do anything else. You cannot focus on anything else. And Rosa was quite young then, our daughter. So yeah, it was very stressful, but it was, it was good because I was kind of running on the back of a campaign, sustainable. Well, it was called then the Sustainable Transport Campaign. So there was a lot of support in Canterbury, and it's exciting to see the Green Party is really doing so well. And even though the mainstream media aren't telling us anything about that, the Green Party is the real threat. So yeah, it's exciting.
I want you to tell us a little bit more, Joe, then about how can we align our need to consume with real true sustainability. But also Georgina picked up on something like when you lost the fridge freezer and people couldn't conceive that. I got a little bit of that when I moved to Canterbury for the first time. I'd never seen a store like Unboxed before. I didn't know how it worked. It had to be re-socialized and create new norms. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about community-based efforts to create new opportunities and new norms for consumption that's better aligned.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I would start with saying that obviously we need to eat, but do we need to consume? Really, I think that needs to be the first question that we always ask ourselves as individual consumers. Do I need this thing? It's what Georgina was saying. Do I need that? Do I really need that new thing? Do I need that stuff? There's a great, you're probably all aware of it, but there's a great kind of like a cartoony type infographic thing online called The Story of Stuff, which just sums it up brilliantly. It's just, all this stuff that we're just accumulating, and actually it makes us miserable, most of it, having too much stuff. Even here, we're living off grid, and we're in a caravan, and I've kind of got this mobile office, and I can just see, I know if I clear stuff away, I feel better. And, we just don't need new things. So that's the first question I think people need to ask is, do I need it? There's other ways to consume, but do I need that thing in the first place? And then the second thing I think we need to ask ourselves is whatever I'm buying going to harm anybody? Has anyone been harmed in the production, the distribution, whatever of this, whether it's food or stuff, a thing? Has a human been harmed? Has a more than human, animal been harmed? Has the planet been harmed? And if so, don't buy it. We just don't need to buy it. We've got that power. I think that Alex was talking about right at the beginning. We have, as consumers and as individuals, we have got a lot of power. So we can choose where we put our money, within the system. We're stuck within it at the moment. You know, probably most people in this on this panel and listening in would like to see the end of this capitalist system. I certainly would. But at the moment we're within it, so we can exercise our power as consumers. So then I would say the next thing you need to do before you buy something is think about the business, the company you're buying from. Are they ethical? Look into their ethics. You know, what are they actually all about? Are they a small business? Are they packaging everything in plastic? You know, are they exploiting humans and other animals, etc., etc.? And if not, you know, maybe I can buy that thing. But then there's this whole circle. It used to be I think it's reduce, reuse, recycle, but now it's like I wrote it down because I couldn't remember the whole thing. It's refuse, so you don't buy it. Reduce, don't buy as much. Reuse, so don't buy a new thing, or you know, reuse what you've got. Repair, regift, give it to someone else. Recover, and recycle. So the whole thing about recycling has just been, you know, a big fail really, because most of us think, as long as I'm recycling that stuff, that plastic, that, you know, tin, whatever, I'm doing well, I'm doing good, I'm helping the planet. But actually it's just, you know, it's not the case, and it's you know, kind of making things worse. So sorry, I didn't answer your question, which was about community efforts really, but those, I think we have to think about those things first. But there are places, like you touched upon Unbox, there's places that you can shop. I would say mostly for things we need to eat. If you can't grow it yourself, you can't buy it from a veganic farmer. Next thing is an organic farmer, you know, maybe. And then there's shops, you know, zero waste shops like Unboxed in Canterbury, where you can take your own containers and fill things up. And their stuff is all vegan, it's all ethical, it's all fair trade, that kind of thing. There's fair trade shops, it's like Siesta, which has been going for decades, which is a really good fair trade shop if you want to buy something new, some clothes or whatever. Obviously there's charity shops, but I think charity shops are overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that people send because they don't, you know, because we're just consuming too much in the first place. So and then yeah, we have our monthly markets. We've got a vegan market with very strict criteria in terms of the stall holders. Obviously they have to be 100% vegan, and then what they sell can't be in plastic. You know, we have a rule about certain sourcing palm oil, that kind of thing. Has to be fair trade if it's products, you know, ingredients that would come from exploited countries, etc., etc. And then there's other markets like that. The Westgate Hall in Canterbury is a really good community-run hall, which has been refurbished quite a few years ago now. And is very environmentally friendly in the way it's been refurbished. And they have different markets with local small businesses and makers markets, that kind of thing. It's other, yeah, I wrote a list because I thought I'll forget them all. Canterbury Whole Foods, it's just kind of independent shops that really are keeping them, you know, the money in the local economy, if you like, even though, you know, it's still that capitalist phraseology, but it's better than, you know, giving your money to small local business that supports working people, if you like. So there's Canterbury Whole Foods, there's the Good Shed, there's Vegbox Cafe, there's quite a few different independent cafes and places like that about. Just avoid the corporate stuff, you know, don't go to Primark. Why would you? Oh, there's Lady Luck, we were there last night. It's a really lovely, I don't know if lovely is the right word really, but it's a most friendly pub, I would say, in Canterbury. They've got a great vegan menu. So, and there's also, just the last thing I would say is a couple called Diane, I don't know if you know them, Corey, Diane and Mark, who run the Green Team Canterbury. And basically they collect up all the stuff that is left by students, you know, at the end of each term, I think, you know, that would just be thrown out, that's been bought, you know, kettles and clothes and goodness knows what. They collect all that up and they have a place in Hales Place in Canterbury, and you can go along there and get things for free. So they're basically kind of, you know, reusing. So that's cool.
And I think that they just posted that they've been overwhelmed as well. It's like the charity shops that they've just got so much stuff that.
Exactly. People are just buying too much stuff. Just don't buy anything. Just don't buy. Go a whole year. I think quite a few people have done that, haven't they? That challenge of, you know, obviously, you know, you have to eat, and there's certain kind of other things that you have to buy maybe, but mostly just food, isn't it? What else, really? I don't know. What else is there you have to buy? Yeah, so just don't buy anything else.
Alex, you want to jump in? You have a question?
Yes. Well, I was going to flag up a question from the meeting chat, which I think speaks to what Joe's been sort of providing a number of solutions. Actually, Joe, do you mind, as you've got that list, I think a lot of students in the audience would find it really helpful if you could maybe share that in the chat. Certainly some of the things that have got, you know, clickable links or things that would be useful for students to look up, because I think that would be really, really helpful.
Do you want me to share it in the chat, or send it to Corey and you, and you can send it out to people? It's quite a bit of a list.
Why don't you share some of the highlights in the chat, and then maybe
okay.
we can, while people are here, and then we can maybe circulate something afterwards as well. But I was just going to read a question for the panel from Maria, who put this question in the chat. So Maria says, do you think some of the problems around sustainability, e.g. greenwashing, arise because sustainability is being framed in the wrong way? Instead of being seen mainly as an issue of physical nature that requires physical solutions, it is presented as a cultural issue with the emphasis put on individual behaviour, consumer choice, etc. This framing is unlikely to bring radical change. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I'm happy to pitch in. I think it's a physical issue and it's a cultural issue. So there's really a sort of interesting, I suppose, ontological debates around whether, I mean, the environment, and I've had very interesting conversations about this as part of my PhD research, the environmental crisis being a physical crisis, and how do we talk about it in sort of in real terms, but at the same time the power to sort of, or that, you know, we're at where we at because of a really problematic historic culture, society, and economy. So there is this interplay between the physical and the cultural. So they really both need to factor. I think we've gone past the point of seeing the environmental crisis as, you know, just sort of using scientific evidence to say, look, this is the problem we're in, and we just need scientific solutions. And then you sort of go down the wrong track of this kind of you know, tech solution framing, when it is a social crisis. And we know it's a social crisis because people around the world and nature is already just you know, suffering immensely because of this. So the repercussions are already social, and the solutions need to be social as well, but sort of bearing in mind the sort of the physicality of the issue at hand. So, you know, this is where, you know, the power of social movements to change those cultural, social, political, economic aspects that are at the heart of it. So yeah, I suppose I'd just say it's absolutely both, and we need to keep both in mind. Yeah.
Claire, we haven't heard from you in a little while. Do you have any thoughts on that? How?
Right, yeah, I was going to say, I do think that one of the main problems around sustainability is the way it is framed, because it's obviously the people that have the power over the definition and how sustainability is put in place, and where the emphasis is put on is actually the people that have all, whose interest it is that the system again remains the same and they can keep on profiting. So, and I think it is easier to put, not easier, but it's less threatening to the system to put the emphasis on individual behavior and consumer choice, because then it's like it's your own fault as an individual if things are not going the way it should be. It's because you're not buying enough eco-friendly stuff, and of course individuals again have a tremendous role to play, but I think it's a bit, yeah, it's not, there's a reason that what's emphasized is individual behavior and consumer choices, because you can change individual behaviors all you want. If that's the only thing that changes, it's not going to threaten the system as much as saying that sustainability is actually a political problem, and again, a political organization problem. If you're saying that, then you're saying that the solution to the climate change crisis is actually revamping the system and changing the way politics are run, and that threatens profits, that threatens capitalism, that threatens people in power. And we're already seeing climate change migrants, and so obviously it is a current problem, and it's a problem that's just going to get more and more dire over the years. And if it's a political problem, we need a political solution. But I absolutely agree with Georgina, it's also a cultural problem. So I think, yeah, it's very much multifactorial as an issue, and the emphasis should not just be put on individual choices. It's a global problem.
I think that is one of the key takeaways I was hoping that would get spotlighted in this panel, is the focus on individual consumer choices. While individual choices, of course, matter, that's not the big picture. The big picture, of course, is the way the system is set up. So thank you for really highlighting that. I think it's really, really crucial. So we're almost at the end. We've got about 15 minutes left. And I think that before we part ways, Joe's done really good to highlight some of the local stuff that's going on. Maybe Georgina and Fleur, if you could also talk about what's going on campus. Do you have any suggestions for students or community members who are watching who might not be familiar with sustainable efforts on campus, animal rights, vegan stuff that's going on campus? Are you guys aware of anything that might be of interest to people?
As a very remote sort of PhD student, or especially through lockdown, I've really not been that connected with the campus at Kent. I live in Folkestone, so I've got a bit more of an idea of what's going on here. So maybe Fleur's better placed for that one.
Again, I'm very much I moved to Canterbury in the middle of the COVID pandemic, so I've hardly ever been to campus, and nothing much has happened in my time here. So I'm not very familiar with what's been happening. I know that there's a vegan society that exists on campus that I'd very much like to join, but I haven't really gotten around to actually knowing what's been happening. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fair enough. I didn't mean to put you guys on the spot. The reason I asked is because there's so much that I was afraid I'd leave something out. I put it in the links here, but for people watching this on YouTube later, if you go to the University of Kent website, there's a page called Student Sustainability Groups, and all the different student efforts are collected there, including the Student Vegan Society. The University of Kent is really up and coming, I guess you could say, when it comes to sustainability issues. We're not on par with some of the other universities, but this is something that is happening right now as we're recording in 2021. So there's a lot of opportunities for students to organize and think about what sustainability really truly means. Not making just as individual choices, but coming together as collectives, impacting local government, going on as Fleur and Georgina are going to do after they graduate, and make an impact at a larger political level, hopefully. Yeah. What about you, Joe? You've offered quite a lot of opportunities here, but if you had to advise people who are watching this who want to be better Canterbury citizens, where would they start? What would you say was a good place to begin? I would say Unboxed. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, in terms of places to buy things, yeah, well, kind of what I just keep thinking of stuff, so I'm putting in the chat. Sorry, it's probably too much now, but yeah, there's I just mentioned there's an eco fair that it's at the same church that we have our vegan market. That's in October. I think supporting things like that, there's a fair trade. I'm just about to put in. There's always a fair trade Christmas fair, so people do want to buy presents for friends and family, that's fine, but there's places like that you can go. And then Unboxed is great, you know, because it's kind of like the centre of Canterbury. And come along to our market, really. Obviously, I'm going to plug that, the 3rd Saturday of every month, and it's just a lovely vibe. So you're going to meet other people who think, you know, in a similar way. It's just a whole mixed group of people who come along. It's nice just to sit and relax and check out the stalls, but just hang out there really all day. So yeah, and just as I said at the beginning, just don't think about whether you need to buy that thing, especially if you're.
I wanted to highlight also about Joe that you do a lot of work to build community. For instance, when I first moved here and I didn't know anyone, you know, welcomed me in, and other people who move into the area. And I think that's a big part of this kind of pushing away from just individual consumption choices and making this kind of a Canterbury community norm to think more ethically about how we consume. What do you think about this? There's a bit of a critique here in the chat, Joe, about Unboxed being not so cheap. How would you respond to
that? Yeah, someone else mentioned that earlier today, and I guess it's again about choosing what you buy, isn't it? Choosing where you put your money. You know, you could buy, I don't know, 10 bars of Cadbury's chocolate or something, couldn't you, maybe for the same price? But it's who's been exploited, who's been harmed in that production, and thinking about yourself as well. Are you going to harm yourself by consuming that stuff? So, and you know, you can buy I don't know, however many t-shirts from Primark, but which will probably fall apart. I don't know, you know, not the people who are being forced to kind of produce that stuff are not being paid properly, or are slaves, you know, the indentured labour. So it's that kind of embedded cost, isn't it, really? So it might cost a bit more, and it will cost a bit more because they're in the high street, they're paying very expensive rent, so they've got that to take into account. But actually, what do you need? You know, what stuff do you need? Can you kind of refocus the way that you're spending your money? You know, so I don't think actually, when you take into account the embedded cost to the environment, to other humans, to other animals, and to yourself, you know, your own health, then it's not expensive.
Excellent, thanks for that. So I'm going to come back to Georgina and Fleur, or maybe Georgina in particular, because we're talking about kind of building community norms. Well, part of that is revisiting social movements. So Georgina, you've specialized quite a lot in environmental activism in the area. Maybe you could speak to folks about, you know, sustainability being a little bit more than just your consumption choices, but also the activism that you might engage or support.
Yeah, absolutely. And that community can be found in, I mean, I've certainly found it in Extinction Rebellion, and my group is XR Canterbury, and you know, we all got together on the weekend, not to go and sit in a road or anything, but to sort of share our friendships and our sort of common sort of thoughts and grief, and not in like a sort of wafty sense, but also, you know, real conversations about energy, and you know, had a really in-depth conversation about the prospect of sort of hydrogen cells, and so you sort of, if you're interested in these things, fine, you know, being a part of a social movement is well, I mean, there is a key purpose of that. It's not just a social event, you know, it's got a very sort of direct purpose. But you know, through these networks, you know, other stuff, you know, arises, and you find people living in ways which are you can be inspired by. So you know, this friend's place I was at, you know, they grow all their own, and they're quite in the centre of Canterbury, and or grow most of their own, and so there is this sort of, you know, these webs of networks you can forge with people and learn and exchange ideas. And there's quite a good, I live in Folkestone, there's quite a good network here of sort of food makers and sort of local produce, and there's a vegan market which you probably know about. I don't know if you had anything to do with that, but there's certainly one that has popped up here every once in a while. And there's a veg box scheme as part of the Kent Food Hub network of bringing together local growers and sourcing them all, and you're able to sort of order online and go and pick it up at a location in town, and that's also a social event. Everyone's getting their local produce, buying sort of kimchi made by that person, or sort of locally grown stuff from there, or but it's also a social event, and it's those kind of places then where that network can strengthen. So I'm certainly more of the less of that sort of social sort of networky type. I'm very committed to direct action and non-violent civil disobedience as a way of trying to change the system. So I'm maybe at that sharper edge of the wedge, but behind all of that is that sort of movement building and networking and the sort of social activity. So yeah, whichever way your way into this stuff is, there's a place for everyone, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Georgina. We have some pretty good critiques happening over there in the chat. If Alex, you want to introduce those, and we have about 7 or 8 minutes left.
Yeah, so Maria comes back with a question saying a lot of people are guided exclusively by price. How do we convince them? And I think it's interesting to think about in the context of people who do have who are poor, and people who have economic constraints that not everybody may necessarily have. We also have a question from Jeremy, who says the fundamental question is one of how best to affect behavioural change at a personal and societal level. Approaching this as a political capitalist fight, whilst valid, is unrealistic given the pressure of scale and time. Paradigm change is perhaps better positioned from an aspirational perspective. Universal basic income would provide a vehicle for individuals and society to reevaluate its needs and desires. And also, Jeremy, coming back to what Georgina's just been talking about, it's an extremely positive, but the challenge is to break out of like-minded groups, individuals, and create a broader vision that society as a whole is keen to adopt, as they believe to be inclusive of their reality and aspiration rather than a negative. I think it's important for us to think of, especially coming to a new area and the kind of resources that people have, thinking of making responsible and ethical decisions as a sort of process, and how we might sort of reach the point of being the kind of activist and being the kind of responsible consumer that we want to be, and not something that we can necessarily achieve straight away. So anyone would like to jump in with responses to those questions?
I don't mind coming in again. So let me get this straight. So there's the first cluster was about so that's sort of an aspirational perspective. I absolutely agree about universal basic income, and I'm an elected member for the Green Party, and that is part of our policy, and that isn't. We absolutely, that conversation is being had, and it's very understood that with a UBI, people can fulfil their just sort of more sort of human potential, and not this sort of this hamster wheel of consumption. And then what did we have? Breaking out, challenges to break out of like-minded groups, individuals, and create a broader vision. This is just so challenging, and I feel in many ways, oops, I've just lost my screen, there we go, as say just on the political front, as an elected member on a district council, which has got 6 Greens, 5 Labour, 2 Lib Dems, a couple of UKIP, and then the rest Conservative, and I'm up against this sort of all the time, trying to speak the language in that forum, and try to convince people in that not in an attacky way, thinking you've got people on board, and then business as usual still clunking along. And one thing that's occurred to me, there is just no convincing some people. I did a talk at the Women's Institute down in Hythe last week, and it was really hard hitting, and it was the WI's own talk on climate impacts on women and girls, particularly in the global south. But they sort of developed the presentation, but I gave it, and there was, you know, a lot of hands up saying that people are concerned about climate change, but ultimately it was framed as amongst the group. Well, some people might be concerned about climate change, other people might have other interests, like completely sort of unrelated. So even though you have people, and I see this sort of in that political space that I operate in, people say, yes, we're concerned, but that's just, no matter what, doesn't seem to be sort of transferring to a shared vision of what the future might be. And there's a lot of sort of academic thought on how you can't really get past people's entrenched and existing values. So I don't necessarily subscribe to this thinking. I think there's other stuff going on, but some people think you need to speak in terms of people's existing values, because it's so very difficult. You're not going to change people's existing values. You therefore need to speak to them in terms of language that they might understand, which is why you see, which is why you have people who are so committed to sort of capitalism, sort of based on whatever those underlying values are, to sort of frame this as, or the possibility of green capitalism, or that this is an individual problem. So it's very complex. I've seen it sort of face to face how hard it is. I think it's it's very difficult to, well, I almost think it's just impossible to convince some people. So again, this is why I'm all for structural change by really sort of putting a spanner in the works. But that's just where I'm at with civil disobedience and direct action. Yeah.
Thanks, Georgina. I think that's a really good place to stop, with a lot of things for people to think about. These are the big debates, you folks, that we talk about in environmental politics in our social movement classes here at the University of Kent. Hopefully this panel has been able to, all the amazing expertise, we've been able to provide you with some practical things that you can do here in Canterbury or wherever you're watching this. But also introduce some of the major theoretical debates and some of the issues with practicalities in the politics of sustainability. So I want to thank you very much for joining me and Alex and Joe and Georgina and Fleur today. And we're going to post this up on YouTube, and hopefully we will see you around at a future event. And definitely check out all of Joe's awesome programming that she has in Canterbury and Kent more generally. So I guess we'll leave it at that. I'm going to hit the end of this recording, and thank you all very, very much.